Well, for a bit more on the situation here, I'm joined by Andrew Smith. He's a professor of French history and politics at the University of Chichester. Thank you very much for joining us on France 24. Now, Édouard Philippe has been seen as a real steady pair of hands during the coronavirus crisis, hasn't he? Why would President Macron want to remove the most popular minister in his government and replace him with a relative unknown? What's the strategy here?
Absolutely. Well, it's an interesting question. I think that's really the heart of this shift. It is about strategy. It is about positioning. It is about Macron trying to exert his influence. And we often see Macron described using that phrase, the hyper-présidence, this idea that he takes personal involvement in so many things. Of course, with Philippe, we saw a lot of kind of interaction, good interaction between the two, between the Élysée and between the Matignon, and you could see this working together, which was, I think, relatively effective. And of course, France has had a pretty decent response, despite what the opinion polls say, to the coronavirus crisis. However, one of the things I think that develops is exactly as you're saying. The Prime Minister is meant to be a sort of presidential prophylactic, as it were. It kind of shields him from this difficult decisions and all the rest. The worry is that when your Prime Minister becomes more popular than your president, especially when they're not necessarily of the same party, you end up with this sort of worrisome, almost like a kind of repeat of the Balladur-Chirac years, where you have rivalry between who exactly is going to lead, and when, of course, in 2022 comes who the public look to as a natural leader. I think here what you've got very much is a statement that Macron is very firmly putting his hands back on the tiller. This is him saying that I am putting myself back in control. He's essentially appointed someone who is, a senior civil servant, who is a technocrat. Of course, he's somebody that worked with Sarkozy, but he's not from that kind of bling-bling side of the right. He is very much a sort of sensible, straight-laced technocrat, basically, who is, of course, very strongly linked to Xavier Bertrand as well, who he worked with in the health ministry. So this, I think, is very political. First of all, it is about Macron seizing control. Appointment of this Prime Minister doesn't signal anything in terms of his nouveau chemin, in terms of the direction. What it signals is it will be very much Macron to the fore. But it also says it kind of heads off some of his rivals, I think, in Les Républicains, because, of course, he's working with a Prime Minister who's very close to Bertrand, who we might see as one of his kind of rivals on the kind of the centre-right. So I think this is about positioning. It is about his own role in defining this, but it's also about who he's put in charge. You look, the southern newspapers like La Dépêche talk about the fact that this guy Castex is he's a tennis guy. He's not a rugby man. They talk about his mayoralty as being very successful. He's a kind of elected local man. He's he has all these attributes that make him a very good civil servant and a very good sort of not yes man, not placeholder. I don't want to say those things. We don't know his prime ministership yet, but it does look like he is certainly someone who's being put in place to allow Macron to exert his authority from the Élysée Palace.
All right, that's the first time I've ever heard a French Prime Minister described as a presidential prophylactic. But do you think Macron, though, is taking a bit of a risk? I mean, when you look at the results of the local elections last week, it was the Socialists and the Green parties that did well. Why has he chosen to pick someone from the political right in this very important role?
Well, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because what this gives the opportunity, we heard a lot about Emmanuel Macron. He gave his, of course, his address to the nation. And one of the things he flagged up very strongly was, first of all, more decentralisation, looking towards the local areas. This is something, of course, that chimes with the kind of things being put across by this kind of green rose kind of wave that swept over France. But likewise, what this does is it means the Prime Minister is attached to the right. And this allows potentially, I think, one strategy that's very much open to the president is to essentially define that avenue as one which he occupies. If he can associate himself very strongly with active, very urgent reforms in favour of decentralisation, in favour of greater democratisation, and especially in favour of the kind of ecological issues that surround, for example, the Écolo Party, then I think that is really, really important. But that allows Emmanuel Macron to take personal ownership of those things. And so when he stands next time round in 2022, it will be Emmanuel Macron who has addressed these issues. If he puts in a Green Prime Minister, then somebody says, well, let's vote for the Green Party next time round. Let's vote for the EELV party. Let's vote for the Socialists or whoever they put up. What this allows him to do is to own these changes. Again, it's a bold move. It's one that may yet fail. but it's one in which he sees if there are difficulties, he is the man, the kind of the Jupiterian figure that he feels he can actually sort it out. So I think this is a personalisation of politics, and it is very much the Prime Minister is in place, but the President to the fore.
Andrew Smith at the University of Chichester, thank you very much indeed for your insight there. Well, to other news now, and a court in Turkey